Hello friends, today I will begin the second part of my lecture on post-colonial African literature. In the first part of my lecture, I tried to trace the development of African literature in its three various forms for the last 5,000 years, and I also tried to stress the fact that how the first generation African writers such as Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka kind of writers, how significant their role was to popularize African literature and to bring in front of the world the richness of African literature. Now, the place where I ended in my last lecture was that the Nigerian writers, they always questioned the concept of too modest. That tag which was given by a certain section of writers all over the world about Africa, and they also wrote about the illusionary, imaginary portraiture of Africa as a dark continent, as a formless area of life devoid of human significance. Now, carrying on from that, when we talk of the second generation African writers and after Africa gained independence from the colonial rule, one of the significant features and one of the significant problems that the African society faced after African society, African countries gained independence was the plight of the women, which was at a very low stage. In particular, when you talk of Nigeria, because Nigeria's contribution in the development of African literature is huge. We know that there are great famous writers from Nigeria, and they have played a very significant role in the development of African literature and in the in nourishment and flourishing of the African literature. But I was talking like when African countries gained independence and African societies, the various societies. In this particular incident, I'm talking about the Nigerian society. When a few people of the society were facing a lot of challenges of day-to-day life, and one of the challenges was the Nigerian women. They faced a multitude of problems like poverty, sexism, racism, gender inequality, and in fact, in their infringement of reproductive rights also, apart from domestic violence, and they were very lowly educated. So these were the basic problems that the African, especially the Nigerian women faced after Africa gained independence from the colonial rule. And here I like to quote Gilbert and Guber. Gilbert and Guber states that in patriarchal Western culture, the text author is the father, a progenitor, a procreator, an aesthetic patriarch whose pen is an instrument of generative power. Moreover, his pen's power is not just the ability to generate life, but the power to create posterity to which he lays claim. What I mean to say is the dominance of masculine writers in 1960s, 50s and 70s is very clearly evident in whole of African literature and Nigerian literature. One of the significant reasons being the plight of the women, the poorly educated women, and the problems that the women were facing, which of course they will overcome in the later part of the century. So this is what I meant in this, and that's why I read this quotation by Gilbert and Guber. Now, why was this voicelessness of the Nigerian women in their literature? There were many factors. One of the factors was the widespread illiteracy among women due to, there were a lot of cultural impediments. So there was this widespread illiteracy. Then, the age division. The male, they were provided education at a very early age. And it was considered that they will dominate the society, they will dominate the family, dominate the women, and the males were preferred to be educated. They were educated at a early stage, and they were educated on the higher side of the education and qualifications. And this male biasness in education was promoted right from the time of the colonial period, and this was one of the main reasons of this partiality was one of the main reasons of cutting the women off from development, from education. So these were the main factors of voicelessness of women. Now, if you look into the history of Africa and Nigerian, especially Nigerian literature during 1960s and 70s, we will find that there is emergence of women writers, and especially the year 1966 is a very, very remarkable year, is a landmark year in the history of African literature, because Grace Ogot, was the first novel that was published by Grace Ogot, Graceogot, Grace Ogot, and the novel's name is The Promised Land, which was published by a company. And Ifuru, Ifuru was the first novel written by a woman to be published in the prestigious, Hanneman African Writer Series. Now, this Hanneman African Writer Series played a very, very significant role in the upliftment of African literature as a whole, which of course we can talk about in some other lecture. So, in African literature, especially in Nigerian literature, the year 1966 is very, very significant, because it marked the advent of very contemporary female writers writing in African fiction. And some of these female writers are Flora Napa, Aidu, Grace Ogot, Ofia, Sutherland, Buchi M. Chapter, of course. Then you had Maryam Abba, and all such kind of tremendously gifted and talented writers. And what were the themes of these female writers? The basic themes was, first, to express a sense of solidarity. Of course, their marginalization problem was highlighted, and it also highlighted the capabilities the women can have. And these works by these women writers also marks a scathing opposition to women's alienation, dislocation and displacement. So these were the basic themes. Now, if you look into the woman writer called Flora Napa, is considered and hailed to be the mother of African tradition of fiction writing, and she was the first woman writer to challenge the orthodoxies of the male writing representation. Some of her famous novels are Ifuru, in 1966 you have Idu, 1970 you have One Is Enough, 1982 Women Are Different. These all novels which she has written mirrors the issues that concern the women. And what are the issues that she highlights? Of course, the issues which were very, very prevalent in her contemporary society, such as the marriage, the importance of children in marriage, her roles at home and family, and of course the need for economical independence that the women should have in order to progress and move ahead in life. Of course, the brutalities of the Nigerian Civil War was reflected in her work Never Again, which was published in 1975. Now, Igbo Society, which we all know, Igbo Society is a very famous society which forms a background of many African writers, because they belong from the Igbo society. Now, Igbo Society, along with its various cultures and traditions, was also portrayed in some of her works, because she also belonged from that society, and she also pioneered the new African woman, the concept of new African woman, in her novel called Ifuru, which was published in 1966, which is considered to be the boldest deviation from the stereotypical image of women envisaged in African literature. Now, Maryam Abba is also another Senegalese writer who crusades for the valorization of women power. Some of her novels, such as So Long a Letter and Scarlet Song, they exhibit the yearnings of African women. She also empathizes against the social injustice and the indignities that were inflicted in women in the African setup. Now, Ama Ata Aidu was a writer from Ghana, female writer from Ghana, whose writings clearly depicts that she was a writer who wrote for the cause of the blacks and their betterment. and her works exhibit her deep resentment regarding the influences of Western culture on African consciousness. So, when you talk of colonization, when you talk of post-colonization, we always, we also always have to understand the fact that there is a huge difference between imperialism and colonialism. Colonialism not only was capturing of the land, but colonialism was capturing of the culture. Colonialism was stripping off one's culture, one traditional native culture, be it in the form of language, be it in the form of food, be it in the form of belief in self, and we also have to keep in mind that sentence called the white man's burden, which also, which gives a very clear-cut idea of the colonialistic mentalities. And Africa is a continent which suffered a lot. Testimony to Africa is really a testimony to colonial exploitation and sufferings that were inflicted on these African writers, which can be seen, and that's why it affected the African consciousness. And Africa was represented as a country of mystic land, as a country of black magic, and they were all imaginary things. And these writers, played a very pivotal role in breaking up that illusion among the people of the world. So we were talking about these writers. So these female writers coming in African literature received a tremendous impetus with the arrival of Buchi Mchata in the Nigerian literary scene. Buchi Mchata, of course, was a Nigerian Igbo novelist, and is generally known to be a very prolific novelist, and is considered to be the best African female writer writing in English. Buchi Mchata. Now, she received her some of the prizes, recognitions that she received because of her tremendous capacity and capability as a writer. One was the New Statement Jack Campbell Award for Commonwealth Writers in 1978. This particular prize that she received was because of her groundbreaking work called The Slave Girl. Her other awards include the Best Black British Young Writers, which was conferred to her on 1983. The centrality of her subject matter depiction is the depiction of American women in contemporary African terrain, which really earned her an undisputed place in African literature. It is important to note here that though she is committed to represent the life stories of the African women, but the world of her novels mostly revolved around the female oppression that pervades in the Igbo society. This is the society from which she belongs, so she obviously portrays her society. And she's a prolific writer and has written quite a huge number of novels. Some of the novels are In the Ditch, which was published in 1972, Second Class Citizen, which was published in 1974, The Bride Price 1976, Slave Girl 1977, The Joys of Motherhood 1979, Destination Biafra 1982, Double Yoke 1982, Nairapa 1982, The Rape of Shavi 1983, Gwendolyn 1989, Kende 1994, The New Tribe 2000. Now, apart from this, she also wrote novels for the children, and some of her children books are Teach the Cat, Nowhere to Play, The Wrestling Match. She also published a number of articles. So from this output you can understand the kind of prolific writer that is associated with her name, how well she justified. And she has also penned screenplays also. 2 screenplays she has penned, A Kind of Marriage and Family Bargain for radio and television, which were of course aired on BBC. She also wrote her own autobiography, which is called Head Above Water, and which was published in 1980. So in this lecture I tried to give you a brief idea about the African, especially the Nigerian second generation writers, and the influx of the other gender, that is the women, not in the marginalized sense, because when we are going through, we understood that the male writers dominated the scene for a lot because of some social problems that I had tried to explain in this slide. And then there was this advent of female writers, and their tremendous output, their tremendous writing. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope to meet you soon. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.